Welcome to White Rose Media. Today I'm going to be talking about an issue that's popped up in my home state, or the state where I'm currently living, California. Secession is something that's going around again. In 1850, California was admitted to the Union as a state, and in 2024, California approved a ballot initiative to collect signatures to have California secede and become an independent country. The only problem with this is there's no constitutional path to secession. In 1869, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot secede. The Union is indissoluble, and all attempts at secession are null and void. So it's just kind of a non-starter from a constitutional perspective. There is no path to secession, but there is a way to deal with the problems that California faces. It's called partition. Partition has been used a number of times in American history. It was mostly used on territories before they were admitted as states because it's a simpler process then. It only requires that Congress approve the boundaries of the new state. At the time of the ratification of the Constitution, there was a territory called Southwest Territory, which was part of North Carolina. But because it was a territory, the Congress was able to just partition it off and create a state of Tennessee without North Carolina being involved in the process. About the same time, Kentucky was partitioned from Virginia. Kentucky was part of the state of Virginia, so that required Virginia's approval. And in this case, Kentucky was kind of a newly settled area, and they didn't believe that Virginia could properly represent their needs. And finally, Virginians decided they didn't want to be bothered with this new state, and they agreed to partition. Kentucky became a state in 1792. This is what the country looked at like about that time. Here we can see the territory south of the Ohio River, which became Tennessee, and all of this at one time was Virginia. And then up here we have a state called Massachusetts, which included the current state of Massachusetts and what became the state of Maine. At that time it was the District of Maine. And the people of the District of Maine had long wanted to be separated from Massachusetts. They were very different economies. Massachusetts was a maritime economy, manufacturing economy. Maine was very rural and just had very different needs. And at that time, the people of Massachusetts just weren't really interested or able in administering the District of Maine very well. But it took a little while for that to finally be approved. Finally, in 1819, Massachusetts allowed the District of Maine to separate, and in 1820, Maine was admitted to the Union as a state. And one of the big impetuses for this was the War of 1812. During the War of 1812, the British invaded Maine a number of times, and Massachusetts didn't really do anything effective to help the people of Maine deal with these British incursions. And eventually Boston just said, we just don't want to deal with this, so we'll make it a separate state. And like I said before, partition is a completely constitutional process, whereas secession is not. Partition requires approval of Congress and the legislature of the state to be partitioned. And in the case of California, that could be an issue. But I think there's a way around that. And what happened with the great state of Virginia could be sort of a template about how to deal with it. So during the Civil War, the duly elected government of Richmond decided they wanted to secede from the Union. The people of West Virginia, what became West Virginia, they were just part of Virginia at this point, did not want to secede, but they did want to be partitioned from Virginia, and they'd wanted that for some time, but Richmond just would not agree to it. So when Virginia decided to secede, the United States government said, okay, you want to secede, then your government is just not legitimate state government. If you're trying to secede, not a legitimate state government. We don't need to ask you if you want to be partitioned. What happened then was some guys got together up in Wheeling, Virginia, and they were people who advocated for West Virginia being partitioned, who did not want to leave the Union, and they made themselves the restored government of Virginia. And the United States said, oh, you don't want to secede? Well, that means you guys are the legitimate government of Virginia. And they approved West Virginia being a separate state as long as West Virginia would include an amendment in their constitution ending slavery. These guys up in Wheeling said, sure, no problem, we'll do that. So according to the federal government, West Virginia was partitioned from Virginia. Virginia thought, we're going to win this war of secession and all of that will be null and void, no problem. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And that kind of illustrates the only way to actually secede from the Union. You got to win a civil war if you want to secede. And that's pretty much the only way to get it done. Now back to our favorite state here, California. When California became a state in 1850, the requests for partition started happening almost immediately. And since California entered the Union 174 years ago, there have been more than 220 proposals to partition the state, and that comes out to about 1 1/4 proposals to partition per year since California joined the Union. One of the most recent ones, and one that keeps recurring, is the request for the state of Jefferson, which would include some northern California counties and then some southern Oregon counties. In 1941, there was this attempt to create the state of Jefferson, and that ended when World War II started. Everybody became focused on World War II, and the thing was dropped. In 2016, it resurfaced, and when it resurfaced in 2016, it included a lot more counties in both California and Oregon. So that is probably the most well-known ongoing partition attempt. But again, it just can't happen without the approval of the state legislature, and that just has not happened. This is a map of a more recent proposal to divide California into 6 states, and I drew it onto a map of population of California to kind of get an idea of how this breaks down. So we have a lot of these areas are very much less, there's not very much population density, as opposed to these areas with high population densities. And the situation we have now is these highly densely populated areas completely dominate the politics of California, and they govern the state against the interests of people in all of these other areas of the state. They just don't understand the culture, the values, the economy of these areas. In fact, they kind of despise the people in the more rural areas. So there's an ongoing push, an ongoing need to come up with a better system than that. This is the seal of the state of Jefferson. It was based on the double cross, and that's kind of an unfortunate symbol. The green and gold color scheme's okay. Rolex watches and the Green Bay Packers use that color scheme, so that's fine. The double X symbol has to go, and I'm not so sure about the name Jefferson either. The double X symbol has very unfortunate associations. Whenever you see a cartoon of a hillbilly with a jug of white lightning, it usually has X symbols on it to indicate that it's a very strong liquor. And this is sort of the way the people of the highly populated areas of California view the people who advocate for the state of Jefferson. So I think one of the first things we need to do with our new partition proposals is to update and come up with a much better seal for the state, much better symbolism than this stuff. And don't name the state Jefferson after a 1970s sitcom. This is a map of the six-state solution that I mentioned that came up in, I think, 2013. And the big red zone here, this corresponds to the California part of what would be Jefferson. I think Shasta would be a much better name. It's Mount Shasta in California. It's very picturesque, would look great in the middle of a new state seal. So I think we should go with Shasta for the name of that state. The other states' names could be determined. This little partitioning is marked out on the population density map, how these would correspond to the areas of California. And again, you can see the very rural areas of California would be better represented, and Jefferson would be much better off with its own state, and then this area would be better off. These two would be dominated pretty much by the high density areas that are very blue. If you break this down even more, you'll find that the less populated areas don't vote the same way, have very different needs and values than the people in these extremely high population areas. But that can be dealt with in new state constitutions to make sure that people in those areas get better representation than they do now. But I do think this six-state solution would be the best solution, and the way it's broken up here looks like it would be pretty much the most optimal way to break up the state. And like I pointed out just a minute ago, the state has very different population densities. It also has very different economic needs. The dark blue area represents areas of the state where agriculture and forestry are the main industries. And you also have like cattle ranching and stuff. There's not as much agriculture, like farming agriculture. It's more like cattle ranching and then forestry, that sort of thing. Fishing, both sport and commercial fishing, is also a big economic thing up in these areas. So this part of the state has very different needs. This is the Central Valley area. Again, agriculture is the main industry in this area, and then there are various other things as well. So that map of the new six-state solution, these people would be well served to have their own state. The type of agricultural industries are different than the industries in the North State. Here, agriculture and high tech are the main industries. And again, very densely populated areas really dominate the rest of that area. But I think that could be a workable state. Up here, it's mostly high-tech stuff, software development. Agriculture is kind of like pushed to the side, way in the background now. This area is very high-tech dominated. So with the new breakdown, this would be basically two states here, two new blue states. Down here we have, again, a more red conservative area, and motion pictures, tourism, international trade. Those are sort of the industries that are the main industries in this area. So, the state really does have very different needs according to the various geographical areas and the different sorts of populations that are in those areas. So a breakdown of the state into 6 new states would be the best solution for California. And I think that could happen if California does make an effort to secede. We can bypass the need to have the legislature in Sacramento approve the partition by just saying, we're going to go up here to the north part of the state and get some of those state of Jefferson advocates. They'll be the legitimate government of California. They'll vote to partition the state. Done deal, just like it was done with Virginia. and California will no longer be able to try to promote their peculiar institutions as the South, after the Civil War, was no longer able to try to preserve their peculiar institution of slavery. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as a way to deal with these problems, and as a counter to this idea that California should be secede from the Union. That just should not happen, and that should be just dealt with forcefully and immediately if that is actually an attempt. And we will see what happens in the future here, see how we can proceed with this. And I will be doing follow-ups on this most likely in the next few months. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.